Look at this gorgeous camera. Isn't that a thing of beauty? Makes you just want to go out and shoot some medium format film, doesn't it? This is the Mamiya 6 Automat, one of the last cameras in a long line of Mamiya 6 cameras. I'm going to tell you all about it. I'll give you some history and show you how it works up close, and then I'll show you some of the photos that I shot. And let's get to it. The number 6 in Mamiya 6 doesn't mean 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, as in this was the 6th version or something. No, no. The 6 stands for 6 centimeters by 6 centimeters. A 6 by 6 camera, otherwise known in the American market as 2 1/4 by 2 1/4 inches. They also had variants that had dual format where you could have 6 by 6 and 6 by 4.5, but this one was 6 by 6 centimeters. And that's where Mamiya 6 comes from. And just FYI, there was a new Mamiya 6 made in, I think, the late 80s. We're not talking about that one. Those are very expensive and they're plasticky. This is the original Mamiya 6 from 1940 until 1958. So let me tell you all about it. Seiichi Mamiya, he followed in his father's footsteps. His father was an inventor. And so he followed his father's footsteps and he founded Mamiya Optical Works in 1940. And he launched the Mamiya 6 as his first camera in 1940. And this particular model, the Mamiya 6, went through many changes and improvements over the years, and eventually their production ended in 1958. It wasn't an easy journey. The founding date of 1940 should sound suspicious to you and familiar. And in fact, certain things were happening in Japan at that time that were disrupting the camera industry. During the Second World War, Japan tightly controlled film and camera production, and they prioritized military use, and they made it hard for Mamiya to obtain the parts needed to build their cameras. So they just were not able to produce them in the quantity that they wanted to. After the war, the camera industry was a crucial part of the economic growth and economic recovery of Japan. But at the very beginning, the companies like Mamiya, Nikon, and Olympus, they were only allowed to sell to Allied forces. So there was still some lingering effects of the war, and it took quite a while for them to get over that, to get back into regular production. To keep production going, Mamiya had to collaborate with other manufacturers. They used, that's why you have, on this one, there's an Olympus Zuiko lens, and the shutter, Seikosha from Seiko. This mix and match approach from various manufacturers means that there's quite a few different variants of the Mamiya 6 available today. And there's a really cool video where a guy explains all the variants. He'll tell you how to identify each one, all the key elements to look for, such as the shape of the viewfinder or the shape of the top or something like that. This one, the Automat, is really easy to identify. The Automat, the original version 1 of this, released in 1955, is identified by looking for this horizontal bar under the lens. That actually is hiding the automatic part of the camera, the part that cocks the shutter. There's levers and bars and stuff that go to the advancing knob that are hidden by this middle plate. So that is how you identify an Automat. And they had a second version of the Automat that's identified by white lettering down here. This is the first version. This is a Olympus 75mm f3.5D Zuiko lens. The D is their code for its ABCD, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 elements. This is a Tessar lens, which is the design. Tessar means a particular lens design. This is an Olympus 4-element Tessar lens. Later on, they changed to an in-house Tessar lens on the Automat 2, the one that is identified by white text down here. And they called that one the Mamiya Secor lens, but it was essentially the same thing, a Tessar lens, except that was made in-house. This is from Olympus, single-coated. So some of the things that they had all the way through the series was they had the frame counter built in. They had frame stops, which most folding cameras of the time, you would have to look through the little window. It says a window, but it's actually redundant. You don't need this. But most folding cameras of the era, you would look through the window for the number on the backing paper as you turned a knob. And there was nothing preventing you from going over or making sure that you advance the film between cocking the shutter. There's nothing, no interlocks or anything. These cameras had fixed stops for the frames, and there was an interlock between the shutter mechanism and the frame advance, so you wouldn't accidentally do double exposures. In the original Mamiya 6 from 1940, there would be a little red flag that would show up in the viewfinder when you fired the shutter. And that red flag would indicate, fired the shutter, you need to advance the film. What you had to do is there's a little lever, you would pull the lever and that would clear the flag at the same time you would do the film advance. You could clear the flag and then cock and fire the shutter again if you wanted. And that would give you a double exposure, but that would be intentional. As the years went on, they changed their design until you got to this model where it's automatically cocking the shutter at the same time you advance the film. And let me see if I can show that to you. The shutter is not cocked. As I advance the film, you see this. See that? That's the automatic part of the Automat. By having the shutter cocking and the frame advance all interlinked, now they didn't have to have any little flag telling you to that you fired the shutter or anything. It just wouldn't fire the shutter until you advanced the film, and you couldn't advance the film until you fired the shutter. So no blank frames and no double exposures. Pretty neat in 1955. One of the advances of the later versions was to have coated lenses. The original Mamiya 6 had an uncoated lens, and that means you get this lens flare when you have light coming in from an angle. You really need to have a hood on that. These ones, the later ones, you can see, if you look in the light, you see a purplish hue. It's probably a single coated lens, but it's not like modern lenses, but it's better than nothing. So having coated lenses, pretty progressive. They had flash triggers on the later ones. And again, I mentioned earlier that some of the models actually would shoot 6x6 or 6x4.5, and there were little flaps you could flip in that would mask off the section of the film for the 645. Pricing is a bit of a challenge on cameras from this era. My go-to for old cameras is to take a look at old magazines, and so I was looking through Popular Photography, just squinting at the ant-sized print in those ads from the New York camera stores in issues from the 1950s. I looked at issues from 55, from 58, and there was no mention of Mamiya. I couldn't see Mamiya cameras anywhere in there. And that tells me that either they weren't sold in the US or they were a very niche product. And I think it's the latter, because I eventually, after quite a bit of searching, I found this ad from 1952 for the Mamiya 6 Model 4. And this one, we see it was sold for $99.95, $100. And if you put that into an inflation calculator and turn the crank, that turns out to be $1,200 US in 2025. So that's why these things are so well made. They were expensive. If you had a camera today that cost $1,200 and had no electronics and was all mechanical, it probably would feel just like this. And just very well made cameras, high quality. Here's the original ad from 1940 for the Mamiya 6, the original one. And you can see here it went for a price of 248 yen. I'll leave that as an exercise for the reader to go and convert yen at the beginning of World War II to US dollars and then convert that to modern dollars. But you just run into it. That is anything but trivial to do that conversion. Before we get into showing you the camera's features, let me explain something else that you might wonder, and that is, why would you want to use one of these cameras if you've got other better medium format cameras available in a decent price range? Right here, I've actually got, this is a Mamiya C220. This is a twin lens reflex. This is actually my very first medium format camera. And I really like it. It takes great photos. This is a better camera than the Mamiya 6 cameras. The Mamiya 6 cameras have, because they're fold-in cameras, have some flexibility and stuff. This is firm, and you're seeing right through the lens when you're framing and focusing your subject, because that's why TLRs are TLRs, and you can swap in different lenses. This is a great camera. Likewise, some months ago, I was looking for a 55mm lens for my C220, and it came attached to a C330, this is an awesome camera. This thing is gorgeous. This was a wedding photographer's workhorse for decades. They use these all over the place. Definitely a professional quality camera. So why wouldn't I want to use this camera for all of my medium format shooting? Well, it's pretty simple. It weighs 4 pounds. That's it. The thing is chonky. That camera weighs over 1,900 grams. That's almost 2 kilograms. That's way too much to have swinging around your neck. In contrast, the Mamiya 6 cameras, this little guy, they're not tiny, but this weighs 840 grams. That turns out to be 1 pound, 14 ounces. 1 pound, 14 ounces versus 4 pounds. What do you want to be carrying around? And the other benefit is the size. This thing, when it collapses, it's petite. You could put this in a coat pocket. Not a pants pocket. It's still a medium format camera, but you can put this in a coat pocket. You're not going to be putting this in a coat pocket at all. These things are just way too big. So those medium format twin lens reflex cameras are great, except when you're going out with one of those, it's a big production. You're doing serious stuff. You've got a camera bag over your shoulder. You got all kinds of supplies. Whereas you could travel with this. This is a fun camera for shooting medium format without feeling like you're carrying a huge amount of stuff. Open it up by pressing this little button down here, and it flips open and snaps in place. They say you're not supposed to let it snap in place, but it's kind of hard not to. The springs are fairly strong. The controls are fairly simple. We have on the business end, the lens here, we have a shutter speed ring right here. That's your shutter speeds. This ring. Then behind that, this very difficult to reach little knurled ring right here, and that's your aperture. And you read the aperture over here with this little red dot. This is your shutter cocking lever. So I can move that over, cock the shutter, fire it, cock it, fire it. And we can see right now, this is when the shutter is showing its weird stickiness that caused me problems on my first day of shooting. Notice how the lever for the shutter right here is stuck in the middle. It turns out that the shutter hasn't actually opened, so you haven't wasted a shot. Just cover the lens, persuade it to go over, and now it'll work just fine. This is my camera, and yours probably won't have this problem. So if I cock the shutter now and fire it, there, the lever worked perfectly. It seems to be like there's a piece inside that's rattling loose, and only when I actually manipulate the camera does that thing make its presence known, like if I shake it or something. All right, we have, besides the important parts about the shutter speed and aperture, we have this little guy right here, this brass thing. That's for your flash. You have this little red lever here, which controls the timing of the flash, whether you're using flash bulbs or electronic flash. And of course, nobody's using flash bulbs anymore. And that's really all that's on the front of this thing. This is where the levers that cock the shutter are located. It's a bit of a Rube Goldberg contraption with levers and switches and knobs and everything underneath there that's connecting the advance knob to this little ring here that's going to push the cocking lever. So if I turn this, you'll see, watch, see that? See now it cocked the shutter? On the top, we have very basic controls. There's a shutter release. You can use a cable release if you want. And there is a cold shoe, which doesn't do anything except hold an accessory, such as, in my case, maybe a little light meter. We have a little window showing us the depth of field for the various distances. Our focus wheel is right here. That controls the focusing of the camera and the rangefinder. On this camera, we'll see the distance in feet. This knob here has a dial that shows your ASA setting. It's useless. It's just as a reminder, because this camera does not have a light meter, so there's no point in having some kind of a automatic connection between this and anything. It does nothing, and doesn't even go up to 400. And we've got this frame counter, which is really nice. See, there's number 7. Shoot the frame. Number 8, shoot the frame. 9. There's nothing on the right side. And there's only a lever for opening the back on the left side. You look on the back of the camera, and as expected, there's a viewfinder. One single viewfinder. There's nothing else on here. There's the focusing wheel, and there's this little window for looking at the back of the film. On the bottom, there's a hole for mounting on your tripod, though it's one of those ones that's off center, and to me, that's just really weird. On the front, we have what I've already shown you, the lens and features. The way you close this, pretty simple. You push these with your thumbs right here on these two not soft corners and press towards the front of the camera, and everything closes. This camera doesn't have the same kind of a focus that most other cameras do. In most cameras from this era, the focus mechanism is in the lens. You turn something on the lens and that adjusts the distance of the lens to the film plane. And others that have some kind of a rangefinder mechanism, you would either copy the number from the rangefinder onto the lens, or you would have some complicated mechanism that would adjust the distance from the lens to the film plane. This camera bypasses all of that with a really clever mechanism. And that is by moving the focal plane as you focus. So I turn the knob, you can see the pressure plate. This is the pressure plate right here. Look at that, it's moving in and out. So they've put the cart before the horse. They're focusing by moving the back of the camera instead of the front of the camera. It's pretty clever. That does mean that if you lose this pressure plate, the camera is a paperweight. I'll give you an idea about some issues you may run into with these cameras. If you go to buy a Mamiya 6, they suffer from the same problems that other folding cameras have, which is, well, first and foremost, if you don't have the pressure plate, the camera is useless. Make sure your camera comes with the pressure plate. But the next thing that you want to look for is you want to make sure that the bellows doesn't have pinholes in it. It has to be light tight. And the seller should tell you that. And if you have one of these you encounter, like in a thrift shop or something, get a flashlight. You want to go into a darkened place and check to see if you can see pinholes. And if you have any pinholes in yours, there are ways to patch those. I don't know how to do that, but it's certainly a topic you can look up, and there's probably videos telling you all about it. Other issues you'll run into is the rangefinder being misaligned. I had that problem. Sticky slow shutter. I had that problem. Film advance issues. I didn't have that one, but that would involve some of the internals maybe getting jammed or something like that. You may have to do surgery on your beautiful camera. Other thing you want to watch out for is you want to make sure that you buy a camera that has no fungus and, if possible, no haze. Lens, viewfinder, rangefinder. That's an important thing. You don't want fungus in the camera unless you want to get into tearing apart optics and cleaning the fungus out. Before I went to shoot with this camera, I wanted to understand the baseline, what my shutter speeds were. So I took my shutter tester and went through, and I found out that the 1/250th was good. That was shooting at 1/240th. All the others were slow. 1/100th was shooting at maybe 1/60th. The 150th was going at maybe 1/30th. And the 1/500th was going about 1/450. Not too bad, especially because I do like to shoot with Sunny 16. So what I did was I was able to set this to 1/250th, knowing that it was going to be a little bit slower, just a shade. And all that's going to do is add more exposure. Film is great. As long as you err on the side of overexposed, you'll be okay. And that's what I was doing. I was going to be shooting 400 speed film, set my shutter to 1/250th, which gives me 1/240th, and then use the aperture to control my exposure. And it worked just fine. The rangefinder, I did a video about that. I ended up actually using ground glass and a loop to test the focal plane compared to the rangefinder. It was off, and I had to take the little screw up here. I had to take that off. Actually, I took the whole lid off and was able to adjust the rangefinder patch position, and I got it spot on. It works great. I took this camera out shooting with Ilford HP5 Plus and Tri-X. Those were the two films I took with me. I like both of those because they have a very classic look, and they're very tolerant of mistakes, and they have nice, I like the grainy look of both of them. They are known for being grainy, so watch out for that. I find that the HP5 Plus has a little bit more mid-tones, and at the end of the day, HP5 Plus is cheaper than Tri-X, so I tend to shoot more HP5 Plus, but I shot one of each, and I was not disappointed. Let me show you how to load this thing. To load the camera, we're going to open it back by lifting this little lever up. Let's slide out the pressure plate. Don't lose it. And now we've got two little levers, and you kind of hook them out with your finger and flip them into the center like this. Like that. And then the spools are kind of challenging to get out. You sort of kind of pivot them out a little bit angled towards the sides. So we take that spool and fiddle with it, and now we shut this little lever. That spool's in place, and we take the film. This is just the backing paper, but your film will be like that. Put it in place. Again, it gets to be a little bit of a challenge. There we go. And flip the lever back down. Like that. You then pull the backing paper through underneath these two metal lips right here. And kind of a challenge to get it inside the slot on the take-up spool, especially if it's been used before, like this backing paper has. So you get it in there, and you start twisting the knob, and you keep going and keep going and keep going until you get to the arrows. I'm going to slip in the backing plate right now, the pressure plate. Important note, don't do like I did and put it in upside down. There's the arrow, there's the arrow. These metal things need to be facing you, and the arrows need to line up. That's how it goes in. Now we're just going to keep turning, keep turning, keep turning until the black arrows on the film line up with a white dot up here and a white dot down here. And there we are. White dot, white dot. Now we can close the back of the camera. At this point, we can safely advance the film and it will stop at the first frame. That's the beauty of these later models. There is still a little window that you can use to look and see what's happening. This is completely redundant. You don't even need to use the little window, but I'm going to open it up right now just so we can see as I roll the film past. And at some point we're going to see a little arrow in there. And it says Kodak, and it hits number 1 and stops. It didn't stop because I stopped turning. It actually automatically stopped, and that's what I mean by this little window is redundant. It's just there so that you can have peace of mind knowing that the film is actually moving through the camera. And then we can go take some shots. I did do something which I shouldn't have done, and that is I shouldn't have actually wound the film on with the camera closed. The reason for that is this act of opening the bellows provides a kind of there's like an air suction, and it can pull the film away from the film plane a slight bit and cause focus issues. So you really want to make sure that you don't wind film with the camera shut. And the Automat sort of encourages that because the only way that it's going to cock the shutter is if you wind it with the camera open. So when you're loading film, when you get to the point where you're going to wind it, make sure you open the camera. I'm going to wind. It automatically goes to the second frame. If I look in the window, you'll see a number 2 in there. And we shoot the next frame. 3. And we keep going all the way up to the last frame. And there we are, frame number 12. At this point, this is free to go. And we just keep going, and you look, and we see the backing paper now, and we'll just keep winding it. I'll just hold this like this and keep winding, and you'll see the backing paper eventually finish. See that? And users of medium format cameras, they're used to just keeping winding until they feel the resistance change. But at least with this little window, you can verify that the backing paper is done. Now we can close the camera just to be safe, and we can take it with us or open it up to change the roll. Once we do that, notice the red dot, which tells us that it's full of exposed film and we're going to have to reload it. As soon as you open this, the frame counter is going to do a reset, and you'll hear the spring go thwack like that. And now it shows a little line indicating that it's ready to be loaded again. So now if you're in the field, you would take this, open this little lever, and kind of flip the film out. It comes out a lot easier than it goes in. Take the paper, lick the little gummed label and seal your film and put it away and repeat the whole procedure. Make sure you don't try to close the camera with that lever down. That actually bends parts, and I think this camera may have had that happen at some point in its past. I have to be careful to not try to open the back because the back latch is not as secure as it could be, because I think somebody may have actually forced it shut in its past. Going out and shooting with this camera was a joy. These are so beautiful. They are stranger-friendly cameras. People like to see cameras like this. When you see somebody walking around with a big lens on an SLR, it's intimidating, especially if that lens points at you. People walk up to me and get in my face from time to time if I happen to be shooting anywhere near them. I've had people get all uptight about it. This one, more than likely, somebody's going to come up and say, hey, well, that's a cool looking camera. They know you're all about film photography if you've got something like this. So that's number one reason I like old cameras like this. I also like shooting square format film. It's really neat. It just gives you a different mindset. You're seeing things artistically in a different way when you're shooting with a square frame. I like that. I caught myself actually I shot this way, and then for a couple subjects, I flipped it to the vertical way because I'm so used to doing that. A silly thing because it's square, but I actually found I was doing that just out of habit. This has no light meter. I had a great time just estimating my exposures. And the problems I ran into, the first major problem I had with this camera was that I actually put the pressure plate in backwards. And the pressure plate has an arrow on it. See right there? If I can get, see that arrow? That lines up with a similar arrow in the camera. The problem is it's embossed in the pressure plate. So if you flip this upside down, you'll see the same arrow. So it's possible to put this backwards. Be very careful, don't do that. And when I did that, I scratched the whole roll of Tri-X, my first roll of film I shot. And I thought I destroyed it, but it actually turned out that my first shot was really good. I was able to rescue that one, scratches and all. Make sure you insert the pressure plate, matching those arrows, and make sure these silver springs are facing you. A sanity check is there's a little hole here, and that little hole is so that you can see the backing paper of the film through the window. If you find that you cannot see the backing paper through the little window, then check and make sure that you got your pressure plate in there correctly. Second issue I ran into was, of course, I already told you about the shutter speeds, and I handled that by just choosing the one I could work with. After I finished shooting my rolls of film, my Tri-X and my HP5 Plus, I came home and I developed them using Kodak HC110. The reason I used that was because I have Rodinal as well, but that tends to encourage more graininess, and both of these films don't need more grain. So when I finished developing them, I scanned them in using my trusty Fujifilm X Pro 2 on a copy stand and got them into Lightroom, and that was how I was able to get the photos that I can share with you now. I use those digital scans as digital proofs in order to allow me to evaluate which ones I want to print. And I picked 3 that I really liked. The first 2 I'm going to show you were with HP5 Plus, and the third was with Tri-X. So this one, this is actually a building that I think was from the Civil War. And everything's fallen down except for these 2 posts which form a doorway. And you could see field stone. And it was just kind of cool to be able to go there, and it's just a natural square photograph sort of subject. And a thing I like about this was the in particular, the nature of medium format photography allows you to really separate the foreground from the background. Even though I was standing pretty far from this, that 75mm lens and the large negative made it so that the background is still kind of blurry. Next one that I did at the same place was, this is a statue, and the statue is called, it was a lunch break? Yeah, lunch break. And I like these kind of statues. You probably have something similar in your town, these ones that look like people just relaxing on benches or something like that. And this guy, the actual statue, is painted gray. And it's just a really nice one because the look of this worker matches the era of the camera. I would say this guy looks like he's from the 1950s, and that definitely matches the camera. And finally, this is the one I took on Tri-X. This was my scratched roll of film, and it actually turned out really neat. You look on here, you'll see there's a set of footprints going across this frozen lake. And I gave this the title of The Silent Traveler. When I was on the side of the lake just taking this photo, I was wondering, who was it who crossed the lake? Where were they going? What were they thinking about? It's pretty neat. I like this photo a lot. And I think the person probably was putting their life at risk. I don't think that ice was really thick enough to support a person, but they apparently made it across. The tracks show that. Now, these photos, after I printed them, I used a dry mount process. In my opinion, the only way to show a photo is to dry mount it. And the way that works is, well, I'll show you. This is the press. And you can see, you put the photo in there and it's got what's called dry mount tissue behind it, which is really just a non-woven plastic. And the heat of the press melts that plastic, and at the end you end up with a photo, like this. Absolutely smooth and perfectly and permanently bonded to the backing board. That's why people shy away from doing this, because it is permanent. You cannot get this off the backing board and put it elsewhere. Don't dry mount photos that are one-of-a-kind pieces of artwork. But for my own photos, I always dry mount them. They look great. So this is a beautiful camera. It's fun to shoot, not too difficult for a person who is used to medium format cameras to work with. It has a lot of features from the mid-century advances that we take for granted, such as the prevention of the double exposures and automatically advancing the frames, things like that. These are fun. If you can find any camera in the Mamiya 6 line that's in good condition, where the optics are clean and there's no pinholes, might want to give it a try. I think you'd like it. Let me know in the comments what kind of cameras you like. What's your favorite camera to shoot? That's all I've got for you today. Thank you for watching. Now go out and shoot a roll.